Very important day in Missoula. This is Give Local Missoula County, and we are glad you are joining us. It's a great opportunity today to give to one or more of 133 organizations, great nonprofits in the Missoula area. I'm meteorologist Mark Haka from KECI TV, and joining me, of course, CEO Susan Hay Patrick of the United Way. And we have four wonderful people here, philanthropists, and Susan, you're going to introduce the panel today.
I am. I'm actually going to allow them to introduce themselves, but we are really fortunate to have four committed, generous local philanthropists representing their own personal charitable giving, family foundation, corporate philanthropy. First we have John Talbot, Martha Newell, Caroline Kurtz, and Mike Halligan. And we have a series of questions for you, but first, just tell us a little bit about yourself and your own history of charitable giving in Missoula. John, I know we could devote a whole half hour to you and Sue's charitable giving, but just a couple of sentences.
Well, actually, one of the things I think about almost every time someone brings up the word philanthropy was the lesson that we learned from living outside the United States for a few years, exactly what philanthropy means in our civilization in the United States. De Tocqueville noticed way back in the early 19th century that Americans tend to take care of each other. They tend to want to do that. And we realized living in Europe that the kind of things that we just assume as part of our communities here, like a symphony orchestra or the youth homes or the United Way. These come about through philanthropy and individual giving, business giving and individual giving. And that's a unique American thing, and it is a wonderful part of our society.
And you have certainly given generously over the years to a great many local causes, and we are so grateful. On behalf of all nonprofits in Missoula, I thank you. Martha, another well-known local philanthropist, tell us a little bit about your giving.
I was raised in a generous family, and I inherited wealth at a young age, and I won the lottery, and it's my duty to charity. I'm very happy to support things that strengthen Missoula.
Wonderful, wonderful. Caroline.
I appreciate both what John and Martha said, and feel I have something like that too, but also I'm sitting here as a representative of a family foundation that has interest in different parts of the country because family members are in different places, so in Montana, Ohio, Massachusetts, and the founders of this foundation, I think, were individual philanthropists themselves, and then decided they could do maybe another way, and we formed a foundation, and it's given us a different look at how communities provide services to the citizens and how we can be helpful, and we just kind of feel our way along with how that works. But it's been quite wonderful way for me to deepen my connection with people and organizations in this community. So,
Thank you, thank you. And Mike, everybody knows Mike Halligan, so.
They know the guy that I work for.
Right, true.
Which is Dennis Washington. So personally, I think for both Leslie and I, having the experience of having parents, as John indicated, who kind of set that cultural example of giving back in the community. As we were growing up, and we were parents, strong Catholics and things like that, so we were involved in the Knights of Columbus because of the family was, or my father was, and I think just all along, both her family in the railroad business and us in Billings, and she was up in Glasgow and Havre and Great Falls, and lots of experiences doing different charitable activities through different civic clubs, whether Exchange or Rotary. So that was already part of our kind of a DNA before I came to Missoula, and then we end up helping out with a few nonprofits on boards here, but with the Dennis and Phyllis Washington Foundation, it's this concept of you've got wealth, and how can you most effectively affect a community in a positive way? And when you look at Give Local, I mean, it's that piece of grassroots philanthropy that even as a big foundation, we know that if you can work through employees or work through passionate nonprofit leaders, you will have more impact on your community. Your money stays locally. There's tremendous passion there to actually have services that people want, so you know that it's targeted toward real meaningful needs. So I guess a lot of the personal philanthropy for everyone that gets translated into the corporate and the foundation philanthropy, because you want to be able to have the same kind of targeted impact that your own personal philanthropy might have.
All right, well, I have
Well
a
said.
few questions here, and Mike, you've already actually given a few answers to this, but it's a general question, and we'll go around each of you and just be maybe a little more specific with this. What is effective philanthropy? John?
Well, I would say one part of effective philanthropy is to know the organization to which you're giving. You can't just assume that any letter you get in the mail represents an effective, efficient nonprofit organization. So I think one part of philanthropy is to really try to get to know the organization you're
Good
giving.
idea. Okay. Martha?
That was one of mine too.
Yeah, well,
A very important one.
You know, I think as people think about giving, as I have thought about giving, you know, the first thing is to figure out what interests me and what I have passion for. Then figuring out what groups are working in that area and becoming very informed about them. Figuring out whether to give locally, statewide, nationwide, or internationally. And then to me, also being a stable, reliable partner over time. And for me personally, I'm not a foundation. I feel like I'm a patient donor, and I am not looking for quantifiable change each year. I'm looking for much longer range change, and so I try to be a reliable partner along the way with organizations that I donate to.
That's great. Miss Caroline.
okay, it's getting tougher because I completely agree with John and Martha again. And I think working through a foundation where we request, we ask for proposals from organizations. I think one thing that is very important to me is being able to provide dollars for organizational operations of nonprofits beyond actual program. But I think this also means that it is very important to be knowledgeable about the organization and the people who are working in it. What are some of their challenges? What are some of their strengths? And taking the long view of it as well. And so I think that as a foundation, we've been putting more effort into that area over the last several years. And I find it really rewarding to see the strengthening of organizations here in Missoula.
So let me just speak now just directly about the Dennis and Phyllis Washington Foundation and leave the personal part aside. So if we are looking to invest in a program, I've done a lot of research, as all of us kind of had, on different organizations. And as we look at societal problems of homelessness and hunger and poverty and violence and addictions and corrections, and there's just so many of them, and we haven't moved the needle as a society on a lot of those issues. They are big, but the best way then to move that needle, even for a big foundation, is to see who's doing good locally, who's partnering with the right organizations. It's called the collective impact approach. So as a big foundation, I want to see who's moving the needle on those big societal issues that we can affect from the first person, one person at a time. And so we'll look at that service-oriented, targeted group of nonprofit organizations, usually, that are tying together their services so that children from zero all the way to career, and parents along with those, so that we can see if between all of that continuum of care and services that we, in the end, and I think Martha hit the nail on the head, it's long term. You're not looking at short term things here. It's changing society, one person, one family, one neighborhood, one community at a time. And I think that's the most effective philanthropy, is when you are thinking yourself about, are they, as an organization, working collaboratively with other organizations to leverage their own services, leverage their dollars, and that's what we will look for, I know, as an organization.
So you've kind of all answered our next question,
Yes.
but when you're looking at a proposal or when you are deciding on an organization to support, just to drill down a little bit deeper, like, because Martha, you talked about being less interested in the quantifiable, outcomes after a year, but what do you think what do you look for in a good partner when you're looking to make a grant?
One of the things that I really look for is someone as executive director who I think is really smart. And I sometimes have started funding new organizations when someone moves because, leadership is really important, and effective leadership makes all the difference in an organization. And I think there are some examples in Missoula, both good and bad.
Yes.
So I think that's really important, and I'll let somebody else answer. But that's a place I definitely start.
Caroline, no.
Just one thing that pops into my mind is, if it's a sector, if it's in health services or whatever sector it is, it's looking to see whether an organization, how well do they understand the landscape that they're working in? In other words, how well do they understand who else is working in this area to move the needle, to be collegial with other organizations in Missoula or the surrounding the bigger Western Montana or Montana as a whole. Not necessarily requiring them to be collaborative, but just so that they understand and can really work together to address sort of systemic issues, and that you feel like you're not recreating the wheel again and again or working against each other. But so it's just nice to have those conversations and
so
bring
that
people together.
They identify what their particular expertise is and what their role is in
and
the
how
issue.
they fit into the landscape, into the picture as a whole.
And John, when you are...
What I was thinking of while these folks were talking is, how do you actually find out if some organization is using the money well, is effective, efficient, good leadership, as Martha said? And I think it's important to ask some of the people you know around the community that you respect. I could ask anybody here for an opinion on an organization that I was thinking about, and I think I'd get some good information. But that's it can be a problem. How do you know? Particularly, how do you know when you get a letter in the mail?
Right. Well, that goes to your first point about really knowing who you give to and investing in the organizations that you want to make that effort to get to know. Mike, when you are looking at, I'm sure you get a few proposals a year, a few requests for money.
Day. So, leadership is key. So you want to find that passion that's there. And I think, secondly, you're going to look at administrative costs. Are they too great of resources going to salaries as opposed to direct services to the people that you want to try to help? And in many cases, like my big brothers and sisters, a lot of it is direct service stuff that's training the, or it could be Boys and Girls Club, something like that. So you're going to pay for administrative costs. You want them to be reasonable, and you want most services to go there. And the second piece of that we look for is, are they using a model that is proven to work? Now, what does that mean? Well, if you look at a Boys and Girls Club, they have a model that's built nationwide that every local Boys and Girls Club uses with respect to tutoring and mentoring and after-school kind of diversity in terms of the kind of things they're exposed to. And there's a different academic piece, and then there's electronic. They try to give you in this model options that will help them understand, I do have an interest that might keep me in school. I will graduate now because I have learned something that I didn't know about because I've been exposed to this. It's just a simple after-school program that gave them a range of things that wasn't available in their school system. And so we'll look for that kind of model, because we know somebody real smart has looked at some models out there, whether it's early childhood or after school or mental health or in some of those, any programs.
So they know what works.
The right model here.
Yes.
And if we're not, how can we help build that model? So then, like a graduation matters. That was built in Missoula, at Missoula County Public Schools. We took that model of wraparound services with local people around the table helping struggling families directly at the Office of Public Instruction, gave them $900,000 over, it'll be 6 years when we're done, and taken the graduation rate from 80% up to 86%. It wasn't us, it was finding the right model, the right passion, the right leaders, and local control, grassroots philanthropy, kind of getting that piece done.
That's
fun to do.
that's a great answer.
Local challenges for nonprofits. What are some of the major challenges facing the community?
Well, I think visibility of that they are a proven organization that is moving the needle. You know, there's so many of them, small arts organizations, small groups helping with some mental health services or youth services that are kind of under the radar. That I think that's where I think that kids are operating in areas that are struggling, and that where you need to look and do the research and talk to your other people and say, okay, we know some of the organizations get lots of the money. Now let's see if we can talk to our friends and family about how we can help maybe do a better job of moving the needle and going upstream to stop the flow of problems that may come in school later with behavior or the incarceration.
So prevention, focusing on prevention.
Prevention. So that's what
Yeah.
it's the challenges that I think a lot of the smaller groups, they don't have the resources to really show how much they are moving that needle or making that difference. But they just don't have a marketing budget.
Martha, challenges that you see?
I kind of approach this question on a much more macro level, that a lot of services, Ronald Reagan kind of taught us to distrust our country, our government, and as a result defund it. Between that and the huge disparity in wealth and poverty in this country, you've got all the problems that Mike has mentioned, over-incarceration, addiction, domestic violence, all those things. And so part of the huge challenge I see is that these small nonprofits are expected to provide services that used to be part of a social safety net that our government provided. So that's a very different response, but I think it's just, I feel like the nonprofits I talk to are all kind of deluged by the need.
Yes.
And Missoula's a very comfy place to live for those of us who have resources, and there are a lot of people here who are not doing very well, and it's really easy not to even be aware of it. That's what I hear, is just the overwhelming need.
I totally agree with that.
That's a good point. I didn't even think of that.
We're not going to food bank our way to the end of hunger or end homelessness by asking Habitat to build more houses. They do great work, but they've built something like 50 homes in Missoula, and we have an over 2-year waiting list for Section 8 housing. So it is the nonprofits used to help the people who fell through the holes in the safety net, and now we are expected to be the safety net
Exactly.
and compete for scarce resources. So,
And I like the same things that Mike's been mentioning are, the organizations that excite me most may provide services, but they're doing prevention. Like, the GUTS program is enhancing girls' self-esteem so that they're not going to be, survivors of domestic violence. They're not going to be in those situations. So I like those organizations that do. They're all challenged, I think.
and John, challenges that you see?
Well, there's one obvious challenge in a community like Missoula, and that is there are so many nonprofits in our town, in our city, that to get the visibility that they're speaking of here is sometimes a little hard. Give Local Missoula may help in that respect. You mentioned 100 and some odd
33.
133 that are involved with Give Local Missoula. As a giver, you should be able in that list to find something that is really meaningful to you as a giver. I think Martha was talking about this, that you want to become passionately involved with it if you're going to stick with it over the long haul. And give Local Missoula might give people a chance to study the list and find out, what do I really want to do?
Looking at you.
Well, the other thing I have an example of that I think that philanthropists get better at as we go is recognizing a good idea and a great idea when you see it. And so a couple of years ago, I had a grant application come in for only $1,500 from the Living Water Evangelical Church on the south side of Billings. All I wanted to do was do a little bike repair program, and they had a couple of parishioners, elderly, who could fix bikes. And they wanted to help bikes in the neighborhood. And they thought they could reach 20 kids if they could just get a few bike parts, donated, which they were in the process of doing. And so I saw that application come in, and I know you give a kid a bike, you give him freedom. I mean, it doesn't take a rocket science to figure that out, but I had to know that there's passion behind that grant. So I got on the phone right away. And I talked to the pastor's wife, whatever, and she said, well, this is going to be good, but we've really limited in terms of our infrastructure, our staff, or what we can do. And I said, well, here's what I can do maybe to help to explode this program. I'm using a big word here, but here's what I want to do. I want to give you money for every volunteer you get. So you go to the civic clubs, and you tell them, for every volunteer you give me, Halligan will give me $500 from the Dennis and Phyllis Washington Foundation. For every the bike place that donates a bunch of things, I'll give you 250 more in case you get a few. And for other people who want to donate money, I'll match every bit of money that they want to give in whatever small amounts they want to do that. To make a long story short, this tiny little evangelical church went from helping 20 kids to the signature program in Billings, 1,200 kids,
Wow.
3 parks, north side, south side, and the different Pioneer Park. Volunteer firemen, police, all the first responders, civic clubs there, all over the parks. And she finally wrote me a letter. It's been 4 years. So this 4th year, they've trained so many kids, because they do the training on how to fix your bike too. They've now worked themselves out of business. That there's so many kids who will do that for them. They don't need the old guys anymore to be able to help out, because the kids are there, and you got the first responders there. And so other groups have taken on that task, and kids are still dragging their bikes in to get help. But in more and more cases, those kids are in those neighborhoods helping those kids put those bikes together. But we're still out there making sure they got helmets and make sure they got the chains and things like that. So, but it was $1,500 to start with, and then I think I put another couple thousand into it to make a signature program that helped 1,200 kids each summer. And they won a national award in their evangelical church movement just because they had a great idea that all I had to do was just recognize it. I think that's what philanthropists do extremely well. By recognizing the passion behind those CEO leaders that could get the job done.
I think that's a great example of leveraging a relatively small contribution and doing creative things. And I think another role that you play is that you can push our thinking. Have you ever thought about such and such when an organization applies to you? And I think sometimes we need that, because we do tend to drink from that fire hose of our daily jobs, and sometimes it can be hard to see the forest for the trees. And when somebody comes along and says, think about doing this in this way, and it's worked elsewhere, and I think that's a great role. What are can you give us some examples of some organization or some program that Mike gave his about the bike program that you're particularly proud of, that you've seen really make a difference?
Yeah, well, this isn't like food, hunger, housing. This is, I'm talking about
It all counts.
the Five Alleys Land Trust, which started back in the 1980s when the Montana Power Company, which was in business at that point, had some land around here they were willing to turn over to either the city or the county if they could work it out. So the Five Alleys Land Trust got going. Well, that has turned into an enormously successful organization in that period. I don't know how many, they were probably 100 conservation easements in Montana now. And they've kept our mountainsides in Missoula from being developed, and they have them looking the way they do, which is pretty good. And I bet that's an example of one that
That's a great example.
Early in that land trust idea, and really has been successful.
That's a great example. Martha?
I probably would have to talk about Garden City.
I was going to say, if you didn't bring it up, I would say I identify you so closely with Garden City Harvest.
Which has been very fun. I joined the board in 2004, and it was a little organization that I think most people thought was a bunch of hippies growing food, and it was not an organization that anybody thought about giving very much money to. And it's been fascinating to be part of growing an organization from that level to being one of, I think, the more respected connected organizations.
Absolutely.
In Missoula. And, you know, and it's fun because people now ask me, you know, who are in those earlier stages organizations, and you know, it's about getting the right mix of board members and, you know, getting a marketing person who brings the 4 program sheets together and says they don't look anything like each other. And I think about stuff like that, but she did, and you know, all of a sudden we had a brand, you know. And
It's so
it's,
true.
There's a lot to it, and Caroline and I are involved in the Missoula Project for Nonprofit Excellence, which is helping organizations do capacity building and giving them a chance to look at those weaknesses that they have and how they can strengthen it. And that's really huge because a lot of very passionate people start organizations and they're really good at doing what they do, but they're not really good at, you know, doing payroll and realizing they should have an accountant on their board and, you know, all those things that make a successful organization.
So United Way, as you know, is a longtime funder of Garden City Harvest, and you might remember several years ago, this was quite a while ago, but when we suggested that they might want to get an audit because they were of a size that, and there was pushback and, oh, we don't need an audit, and we said, well then, you know, you don't have to get one, and we understand it's an expense, but it can yield you bigger donations and for the longer term, and just seeing that growth and evolution from, as you said, pretty grassrootsy, hippie to one led by, I think, one of the most talented leaders we have in Missoula. So good on you for being affecting a lot more people and really partnering with other organizations and just doing wonderful work out of a very tiny office building that I know we're working on that too, on addressing that. And Caroline got me involved in the Missoula Project for Nonprofit Excellence, and United Way has funded that.
I mean, I think that's a fantastic, experimental program that we hope will gain legs and keep going in the community and inspire other donors to participate in being able to offer these small grants specifically for capacity building for nonprofits, so that they have an opportunity to really investigate themselves as organizations and become stronger. I was just going to say, though, about Garden City Harvest that it's a perfect example of that kind of collegiality because of the work that they do with youth homes and youth farms,
and growing food for the POV and food bank
for seniors, and you really play well with others, and it's awesome. Can I go back to what you started with, which was specific organization? I mean, I've really had a lot of pleasure working with organizations like ZAC, the Zootown Arts Community Center, which was very, very small and very, very passionate, grassrootsy, and are really have just become extremely important, I think, for youth and for a lot of different people in this community, and they do it in a really cost-effective way, and they just get a lot of bang for the buck. And I think so for individuals out there in Missoula that maybe are new to the idea of supporting some of these organizations that we've come to really depend on, both for social services but also for our cultural enrichment. I mean, it's important to realize that you can give whatever amount, but it really can make a big difference because you are just investing in your own community.
And that's a perfect message for Give Local Missoula Day.
One quick question back to you, Martha. You mentioned how the dynamics of government involvement have changed since the 1980s, the Reagan administration. How important is it for government and nonprofits to work together? Is there anything on a local basis?
I think there's a lot. You might be able to answer that better than I can.
Yeah.
I mean,
Local
there seems to be
Government is a
fair
huge partner
Exactly.
in
Though it's
nonprofits.
interesting, in some cases, I would say certain nonprofits had an over-dependence on government contracts, and they have to figure out how not to have that.
Yes.
So
The other problem is that we all have to think long-term in order to, I think, get done the kind of important societal issues that we're trying to address. The government, it kind of thinks in election year cycles.
Yeah.
Or sometimes it's sound bites, it's less. And so I think what we have to do is take that elephant in the room that controls a lot of the money, both state and federal government, sometimes local, and get them to think in that longer term, upstream thinking in many cases, so that you want to stop crime, you need all those cops, you want to stop the incarceration, stop, that sort of thing. You've got to go into areas that they used to fund in early childhood, or with parent engagement, parent training, things that you think, well, parents ought to know that. Well, 70% of them are working now, both parents, and so we've got to have some support structures out there. But I think the government can hurt us and help us if they don't understand that collectively that continuum of care, they are a big piece of funding along the way, and they need to be part of that partnership that allows us to collaborate in better ways so that all of us can do a more effective job. And in many cases, there's still funding in silos, and budgets are still every 2 years, and so you don't get that continuity of care.
All right, well, we're going to wrap it up. Thank you so much,
Thank
Mike,
you all
Carolyn,
so much.
Martha, John. Appreciate you being here, and go Missoula. Let's do it today.
It's a pleasure.
All right.